I think we should bring back the death penalty, Tom. I really do. I think the country's got too lame. There's too many people now being put in prison for killing people, knifing them. When's the country going to wake up?
I don't know. And
I thought they were supposed to have a vote on it every year.
Yeah, I can't stop from bubbling up the feeling that anyone, but I think particularly parents of young children listening to that sentencing now feel about what should happen to that man. And it's hard to stop the feeling that nobody loses if that man ceases to live.
How many people this year have been stabbed for nothing? How many people are going to be put in prison for life? How many people are in prison for life at the moment, wasting our money?
But if you carry that thought through,
they need to be dead.
If you carry that thought through, and the overwhelming emotion, Andy, that everyone's feeling about this, then
if you're prepared to take a knife out, Tom, to kill somebody, and you kill somebody with it, you should have your life taken at the same time.
Listen.
I mean, with DNA, everything is 100% now with DNA. They know who's done the job. They know who's done it.
It's not 100%.
Or it's 99%.
And there are examples of people who have been found guilty of murder who it turns out to have had miscarriages of justice. So you would, in theory, be executing people who hadn't committed those crimes, but for a horrendous quirk of the criminal justice system meant that they had been convicted for those crimes. As well as, Andy, the fact that where there are, in countries where there are death penalties, one thinks of the United States in particular, they have horrendous violent crime rates. It doesn't, it's not as if they've brought in the death penalty and horrendous acts of violent crime and murder have dropped off a cliff because people don't want to do it.
Yeah, but how often in America do people actually get the death penalty? You stay in a cell for years and years and years and years. It never happens.
Well, so what's the point then? What you're arguing for is a whole life term. Well, what you're arguing for then is a whole life term. If you don't get to the point of actually executing
my view, if you get done for murder, you knife somebody, you get the death penalty.
I understand the emotion behind it. I get it. Andy, I really get it. I think for cases of horrific child sexual abuse by perverts and paedophiles, I have sat in those court cases, by the way, and heard those sentencings. Chemical castration. I think that could be looked at. Genuinely. What's to lose? I think on the death penalty, the emotion is completely understandable. I just don't know whether or not it is ultimately the right thing for this country to go down that road, because I don't know that it would act as a deterrent.
Hello, Tom. So this isn't the first time that I've rung in about this subject, but the reason that it's so passionate and close for me is, A, because I have a son that was a victim of a machete attack.
Really?
Luckily, he didn't die. But more relevant, I think, is that I was in prison myself 20 years ago for a white-collar crime. And while I was in there, I was lucky enough to be picked to do a media BTEC course. And part of that course was that every week we did a television programme for the inmates. And on one particular week, we did a survey. So we're talking about probably 500 people, all of the inmates, the officers, the governor, all of the volunteers. And we asked them, would they bring back the death penalty under certain circumstances? And it was for repeat offenders. So we're not talking about one-off DNA witness evidence mistakes. We're talking about serial killers, repeat violent criminals, possibly violent paedophiles. By the way, we agreed in our poll that we should chip them and we should castrate them. So good for you for saying that. And almost every single person said yes, they wanted to bring back the death penalty for those particular offenders. And the only people that said no were the church staff. So we then took them to one side and said, if your mother, daughter, father, husband, wife, son, whoever, was killed by someone who had been released from prison that had previously committed the same crime, would you change your decision? And none of them could answer that question honestly. But another point that I wanted to raise you're right, bringing back the death penalty isn't a deterrent, because a lot of people that commit these crimes are not mentally in the position
Diane,
to do
so
so. But Tom, I tell you what it does do. I tell you what it does do. It prevents that person committing that crime again because they're dead. And that's what it does do.
But would keeping them in prison for the rest of their life.
But that's a waste of public money. That money should be given to the families of those victims. That's where that money should go. The prisons are full of people that shouldn't be there. They're either there because they're being detained because of their nationality. They're young men and women that are way past their release date, but there's nowhere for them to go.
Okay, so you reintroduce the death penalty for what purpose?
1,000,000%.
You introduce it for what purpose? Because
to stop that person committing that crime again. Because you're saying that they wouldn't do it because they're in prison.
If you wanted
but they're not, though. But they're not, though, because they sit in front of parole boards who aren't answerable.
Well, isn't that the problem?
Who aren't living in the road where this person is going to be released to.
I get that. That's the problem. Because if putting the death penalty in doesn't act as a deterrent, and you're right to say that, it doesn't act as a deterrent. It does with that person because they'll be dead. Yeah, but it doesn't. It's the ultimate deterrent from doing anything, but it doesn't act as a deterrent from the first instance of them going out and doing unspeakably awful crimes.
But nothing would come because they're not mentally stable. It wouldn't matter what the deterrent was. When they're in that frame of mind, like this guy that killed these poor young girls, and, I mean, I live in Croydon, as your announcer has just said. We've had another crime today. A guy has stabbed five people in Thornton Heath. Yeah. You know, so at the end of the day, if you have committed a crime like this more than once, sorry, you don't deserve to breathe.
Well, okay, I'll last question, Diane. People on death row in America, places like Texas and Arizona and places, they're on death row for decades. I mean 20, 30 years. That's money being spent.
Them to appeal. That's right, because the system allows them to appeal. So in this situation, there's no grounds for appeal.
Well, there might be. Otherwise, why are the appeals being allowed for people who have admitted crimes and put on death row?
Maybe they're not repeat offenders. Maybe they're people that have committed a crime and their legal team is saying, but hang on a minute, what about this bit of evidence? Or we're going to question this bit of evidence.
All right.
Hello.
Hi.
Tom, just been listening to everybody talking today.
Yeah.
My stomach is in knots.
I know.
It's in knots, and I have to agree with some of your previous callers. It has to be the sentence. All right, it's 52 years, but it should have been the death sentence, and it should have been a slow death. Why? Because crime is too much up. We're hearing stabbing after stabbing, and these girls, what's happened to them, these innocent children, it's horrific. And he's going to get 3 meals a day, his clothes cleaned. Yeah, it's easy for him. It's easy.
But Kuadish, listen, I get it. I really, really get it. Because my children are similar ages to the children who've been murdered. We get it. But in the circumstances in which people are put to death, in America, for example, they spend 20, 25, 30 years on death row being given 3 meals a day. So if the part of the argument for the death penalty is it's a money saver because we don't have to pay for 3 meals a day and the sort of they get to have an easy life going from their cell to having a meal to going back to their cell again, and that's not morally acceptable for the crime that they've committed. That happens anyway, even in places with the death penalty.
But Tom, why does there have to be a waiting game? The evidence was there. He'd done it. The police found him. I can't get my head around that.
Hello, Tom. People are naturally going to feel repulsed and angry, aren't they, with it? But I have a former connection with an individual who is currently serving a whole life order. And I know this individual quite well. I'm going to choose my words carefully because it's been well documented. But I can tell you now, if this individual were given the choice between the whole life order that has been handed down to them and the death penalty, they pick the death penalty because it's an easy way out. And my point is this: to stay in prison for every day for the rest of your life, and I know people are going to be emotional about this, to stay in prison for the rest of your life is a far greater suffering than death.
I actually think that the death penalty for somebody like that should be brought back. I understand that we can't bring the death penalty in for everybody. We haven't got the infrastructure for it. It's just like cost effective and everything. But in terms of like when somebody's actually plotted and planned to do something like that, and there's evidence there that somebody's plotted and planned to do it, I just think the death penalty is the only answer for it. Putting somebody in prison for 52 years is not worthwhile for the taxpayer. They just need to go, and he's gone through the trial. He's gone through the
Roger,
situation.
This is an argument borne out through cash. You're saving a bit of money by doing this. And the reality is that even in places where they have the death penalty, people are held in prison for decades, 30 plus years.
Yeah, and I've seen bits in America where you see people, obviously, they're getting the death penalty and they're there for a long time. And I agree with you. It's like, is it worth doing the death penalty? Because they are being held there a long time. It's like, it's a 50-50 thing, isn't it? But
so it takes a long time, so it costs a lot of money, and it doesn't seem to act as a deterrent because there are people running around America doing unspeakably awful things to one another in places where the death penalty exists.
Yeah, and I totally agree, but I also think that where people actually plotted and planned to do something, especially towards children like that, and take a knife to them, I just don't think there's space in prison for them.